Welcome to Hawkeye, the aviation safety podcast where we dive into the world of aviation safety, exploring strategies for a safer and more efficient aviation industry. This podcast is dedicated to examining the latest trends, news, and best practices in the world of aviation safety. And now your host, safety professional and founder of Hawk Aero Safety, Matthew West.
So hi everyone, it's Matt West from Hawk Aero Safety presenting this week's Hawkeye, the aviation safety podcast. And this week we've got some really interesting technology to showcase, and we're talking with Tyson Phillips at ATS Systems with a revolutionary product that I actually got to see over at HeliExpo, which I was kind of excited about. So, hey Tyson, thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me, sir. Glad we're able to link up and make time.
Yeah, time is one thing that's running out a lot for me. How was HeliExpo for you? I know for me it was it was a crazy event. After COVID, we had so many people at the booth. It was remarkable. How was it for you?
It was great. Attendance was amazing. We got a ton of traffic through, and what was really interesting is going back to LA. Of course, you mentioned COVID. The last show, we had Andre, my business partner, and I, along with our other partner Kevin, had kind of made a decision that, hey, we've been focused on the military for a long time, and we were ready to push into the civil side on our training, our technology. And I so vividly remember being in the LA airport, seeing so many people with masks on, and I'm from the central part of the country, so it was very unusual, but I didn't think much of it. And then within a week or two, of course, we start seeing all the lockdowns and what have you. And so being back in LA was kind of nostalgic in that regard, and very odd. Because it was a turning point for our company, and then such a significant event in human history. So, so being back was really good. It was a really good show. I'm excited about the attendance. And I'm a nerd at heart. I love the helicopters. I love walking around the show. And it was just a great show overall, even to attend in the time I got to walk around. So it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're all helicopter nerds at heart. I haven't been on the controls of an aircraft in probably 4 years now. And, walking up, for me, it's the Airbus booth. It's always the Airbus booth.
Yes.
And, it's pretty amazing to think about the money on the floor there. But for me, it's the bringing together of minds, especially on the safety side, where I'm kind of focused. But it's a great chance for everyone to interact and really to push the industry forward. And that's kind of why I latched onto your product. So it was really fate that Andre dropped by the booth, and it was kind of funny. It was like a Red Sea moment. It was very busy, but the crowds parted, and Andre kind of walked up to the front. It was kind of amusing, but and he presented a leaflet on the ATS device. But before we get there, tell me a little bit about Tyson. I'd love to know your aviation background and what brought you into the safety world, and then what came into your organization.
Well, fantastic. So, myself, Andre, everyone involved in our company, Kevin, our background started in military, specifically Army aviation. Andre and I are still currently flying in the National Guards of our respective states. I'm in Oklahoma, Andre's in Texas. So that's kind of where we started. I started off as an enlisted crew member sitting in the back, and then had the opportunity to go to flight school. The funny part is I met one of our partners, I met in enlisted training, and then Andre and I met in flight school. So I've known both of them for a long time. Kind of what got us into this space, Andre's flown EMS. Andre flew offshore, then as well as flying for the military. What kind of got us into this safety is there was an accident of the Louisiana National Guard helicopter. It was a UH-60 Mike, which is what I fly. And it was my sister unit. So the National Guards we have, we call them wartime traces, but bottom line is we have a attachment to a battalion. It may be in your state, it may not. In our case, in my case, it's not. It's the Louisiana Battalion. So I knew the crew. It was an unfortunate accident off the coast of Florida. Andre and I were talking on the phone and kind of frustrated. And, how does this keep happening? The same question we've all asked ourselves so many times before. And it just kind of one thing led to another. And a couple of days passed, and Andre called me and said, "Hey, I've got a really good idea, I think." I said, "All right, what you got?" So he kind of explained it to me, and I thought, that's pretty interesting. We really started exploring what we could do and how we could do it. But the other part, so we started designing our system. But the other thing is, we didn't want to just sell another widget. We didn't want to basically make an extensive hood that didn't solve the problem. So we started digging in. We volunteered with the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. We volunteered with the FAA ACTARC over the course. We were on an AOPA committee. So we really started digging in and did a ton of research on our own, probably in the neighborhood of in the neighborhood of 10 to maybe 12,000 hours to date of research on spatial disorientation, both looking at military accidents, and our focus on the military for the most part was Army. But also the other side is looking at the civilian accidents. They don't vary dramatically. They're very similar accidents. When I teach, we aren't original in how we're having fatal accidents. They're all very, very similar. So it's very frustrating that we keep having them, and there's nothing new about them for the most part. Probably about 80 to 90% similar. So we really dug in, started looking at that piece. Along with the designing of our product, that's where we developed a lot of our academics. It's from that research. So that's kind of our background on how we got into the safety. Andre has, so we're sometimes in the National Guard specifically, we'll have what are called multiple tracks. So both of us are instructor pilots. Andre has an additional track of being a safety officer. My additional track is the tactics side of what we do. But so from a safety side, we kind of get into it from the military piece, but it really was the accident. Louisiana National Guard accident is what really drove us to start looking and saying, "Hey, we need to look at this problem differently, and then how can we build something that's not just a hood?" And that's what we found. It's that on and off. Historically in training, you are either under the hood or you're not. There's no subtle entry into these low visibility conditions. And that's really the key. And what we found is our accidents don't occur in no visibility. They occur in low visibility conditions. So that's been our focus, is kind of how we got there. And then our background, like I said, we're all, Andre and I are very similar, other than he's a Chinook instructor and I'm a Black Hawk instructor.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you're both very airframe loyal too, right? Giving each other a hard time about the different airframes you fly.
No, I think Andre knows deep down the Black Hawk's better aircraft. So I think it's just a one-sided piece.
I love it.
I have the fortunate Kevin is also a former. He was active duty, and he and I went to 15 Tango school. Except it was not 15 Tango at that time. But so he and I are Black Hawk. So we do have a bit of a leg up. He went to flight school about a year or maybe 2 years before Andre and I did. But so we were 2-1. So we went out just in pure numbers. We went out with the Black Hawk.
I love it. Excuse me. Well, firstly, thanks for your service. I know it goes without saying that so much experience comes from that as well. And as a safety professional, I really appreciate what you do for safety. And I don't think it's said enough in our industry. Safety is often the side of the industry that goes unheard. But I just want to focus on a few points you said there. So one thing, from only being on the civilian side of the industry, it's when we focus on these kind of events, the high ticket item is always inadvertent IMC. It's the flight into clouds. But one thing when I was reading your really good leaflet, by the way, was around looking at the spatial disorientation aspect, but also kind of focus more in on whiteout, brownout as well, being able to simulate those kind of things. And also one thing you mentioned earlier as well, which I'd love to touch on too, is the impact for the instructor or the safety pilot too. So not just the individual that's under instruction, because I've been the guy under the IFR hood. It's not fun. No one enjoys it. But that
No.
really isn't. That really isn't anything. I mean, for me, you have that switch in your mind. You've got the hood on, and you're down in the instruments. For me, it was always the focus on transitioning to that state of flight and transitioning back from, not just okay, now I'm in the soup. Let's transition to that type of flying, but also the change back again as well. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head. In your last statement, I'm actually going to hit on first, and transitioning back out. So many EMS operations are going to IFR operations, which is fantastic. Anything we can do to move the needle, and that's certainly going to move the needle. But something we don't talk about often is we always talk about the transition into bad weather. The other piece, and I'll hit on it last, but I do want to bring it up in case I forget. You can re-prompt me. Is the low contrast flight. But we'll hit on that last. But the transition out of IMC conditions is just as dangerous. And we saw that with an accident up in Minnesota several years ago, where the pilot comes out the bottom side of the clouds in the low visibility flight at an airport and ends up in a fatal accident. So the premise is not only can we get in the situation going into, we can coming out of. So as your operators, your EMS operations, and I pick on them because they're the ones leading the charge in IMC or IFR operations. That breakout at these point in space approaches are a very critical phase of flight that need trained. So that transition in and out is really what we focus on. Specifically, we focus on holding them there. You brought up the safety pilot, and that's something from the very infancy of our design, and really it's heavily where our patents are focused on our system, is the safety, is the automation. The FAA, the ACT-ARC, which is not a requiring document, but a recommendation, they came out and they said, look, the vestibular illusions are needed. You cannot get vestibular illusions without sustained motion. The FAA says it takes 20 seconds of sustained motion to develop vestibular illusion. So no typical simulator, level D, any type of simulator, unless it's design built. There's a great company up in Philadelphia that design builds systems that are designed to stimulate and create vestibular illusions. Inside the aircraft, however, it does a great job of creating vestibular illusions because we have unlimited motion. So the FAA and the ACT-ARC came out and said, hey, to provide the best training, we need vestibular illusions. And then more specifically, and this is one of my big subjects that when I teach, is combining the visual and vestibular illusions, combining them together. But then they came back and said, hey, we're going to take the most dangerous thing we do in rotary-wing aviation, and I teach in all aviation, not just rotary-wing. My background and all our backgrounds are heavy on the rotor side, but Andre and I are both fixed-wing pilots as well. So it's a problem on the fixed-wing side. Our focus has started out on the military, on the rotor-wing side, but the most dangerous thing we're going to do in aviation is put pilots into low visibility flight conditions. So they came back and said, hey, to do it safely, you need to consider some of these things. And specifically, we put in our particular system how we combated that concern, and we believe it to be a very, very valid concern, is everything we do is automated. You mentioned dust and snow and whiteout type conditions. We can recreate those automatically through a logarithm in our program. So you tell it, do I want light, moderate, or heavy dust or snow? And then you come in and shoot your approach, and that's the approach. You can do the same thing, like I said, dust, snow, it's irrelevant. We can also get that same sensation taking off. Flying our IIMC or UIMC profiles is the same way. You tell it what you want it to do, and it's going to do all of that. Through the time, the safety pilot's sole job is going to be being a safety pilot. We've seen accidents in the field, especially as electronic flight bags were coming out, where we have distracted pilots. There's some distracted phone usage, right? So we built our system from the ground up to answer that concern. of how do we go out and do it safely. And then the other piece is, in our particular case, if you exceed a preset limit that the user sets, it'll actually take the film and the visor, and it goes completely clear with no input from the safety pilot. So we're not going to distract you. We're going to keep you focused on the task at hand, which is being a safety pilot. That is first and foremost for that non-climb pilot. Because the biggest difference and where our training gap has been is we've claimed we've trained inadvertent IMC, but we never really did. We just trained a version of IMC. You either were in it or you're out of it. There was no development. There was no decision making. Again, from EMS side, they've done a fantastic job. Myself working with Jill Browning with Sikorsky and Cliff Johnson with the FAA and our teaching, we push the en-route decision trigger point. One of the committees that we worked with wanted to change the term. The application is no different whatsoever. But we teach that decision-making process, and with the on-off concept of a traditional hood, that's not there. So that's really what our focus was in the safety and keeping that safety pilot being a safety pilot and not doing this number, looking at an iPad, trying to control a system.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And you brought up Cliff Johnson. I missed him at the show. He came to the booth. Wonderful guy. I worked with him a lot when I worked at Methods as Director of Flight Safety on some of the data sharing initiatives. But before we actually get into the product itself, I'd love to. You mentioned there about fixed wing, and I'm not a fixed wing guy. What are the differences, or are there differences then in spatial disorientation between fixed wing pilots and rotary? I know we've got more motion, if there's a better way of putting it. But what do you see there?
So, a couple things. I think the one that's so cheap and easy to grab is we can go down and slow down. I was just talking with he was a student pilot on both. It was kind of interesting. He was training both fixed wing and rotor wing. I thought that was a bold and expensive process to do both at the same time. But we were talking, and one of the biggest differences I see on the rotor side is it's so easy for us to go down and slow down. The problem is we become less stable in those environments. So I think that's the biggest part. One of his questions when we talk about the en-route decision trigger, en-route decision point, we use altitude and airspeed typically are kind of the freebies or the easy ones as it relates to rotor wing operations. But his question was, how do you do it in an airplane? And I said, it's a little more challenging because you can only slow down so much. And in an airplane, there isn't the natural desire to slow down. For us in the rotor wing side and the helicopter, it is very common when things start getting stressful, we're just going to slow down a little bit. It's very easy for us to descend in altitude if the ceiling starts to move down on us. So that's one big piece. Is just our natural tendency is very negative in the helicopter world. I always joke that the greatest thing a helicopter can do is hover, and the worst thing a helicopter can do is hover in this particular instance. So that's one big difference. The other one was very interesting. I worked on a AOPA committee, and one of the things they did, and I didn't understand it at first, and I'll probably go so far as to say I don't know, I totally agreed with it at first, but it was one of the most valuable things. They took the rotor wing folks and handed them airplane accidents, and they took the airplane folks and handed them helicopter accidents. And I thought, why are you giving me, I have about 500 hours in the airplane, not a ton of time. I'm thinking, why are you giving me an airplane accident? I'm a helicopter guy. By nature, I'm a helicopter guy. But, this is what they want to do. But it was so enlightening because I'd spent all my time researching helicopter accidents. I researched accidents that date back to 2000. Again, not every accident, but I've got a ton of time looking at both military and civil accidents. It was very interesting that typical helicopter accident occurs in the en route phase. The typical airplane accident of the accidents I looked at, and I very well could have had an abnormal sliver of accidents. So I'm not saying this is a 100%. It's just what I saw in my accident research that I did. The airplanes tended to be in the terminal area. And what I do not mean is base to final terminal area. So it was interesting to me. I don't really have an answer or a thought process to why. Simply the fact that most of the airplane accidents were in that transition from the en route phase to the terminal phase of the flight, where most of our helicopter accidents were just purely in the en route phase. They weren't And again, I don't want to create confusion. It's not that turn to final, turn into the pattern. It's not that close to the terminal. It's not the set up for landing phase. It's just that, that 20 miles as we're transitioning, mentally speaking, we're transitioning from en route flight to the landing phase. And I've got some speculations. You're in a different mindset. For my whole career, it was get there-itis and get home-itis. Of course, the more technical term is going to be planned continuation bias, but whatever term you put to getting your job done, as we get closer to that weather, or excuse me, to that goal accomplishment, which in an airplane is going to be landing at the airport I want to go to. As we get closer, we'll accept greater risk. So I think that's part of it, is our mindset changes. The closer we get to goal accomplishment, the more risk we subconsciously are willing to take. That's just a speculation, but that's the biggest difference. Is the helicopter in and of itself creates a more dangerous environment because we go down and slow down, which again destabilizes us. And then that airplane is just in a little different, typically in a different phase of flight. Those are the two pieces I saw that were different in the airplane research. And my airplane research is limited, so I'm not saying that this is 100%. Just in the research I did on the airplane side versus my helicopter research is a little more thorough, and they're very, very often in the en route. The vast majority are in en route phase.
No, I can definitely see that, especially when you say in the cruise portion, when you're flying a helicopter, we see we maintain that level of focus from the time the key goes in the ignition or the door's opened.
Yes.
We're at that heightened level until we come back. We're never really settled in a cruise. I can never speak to a Black Hawk. I mean, the biggest aircraft I flew was an EC-130. So, especially when you were flying, I was flying at the Grand Canyon, with 7 passengers on board. That's that's a little different. But you're basically, once you're in the aircraft, you've got it strapped on and you're at that mental peak until you come down. Whereas that cruise portion of flight, I can imagine you start to settle in, in a fixed wing, and now you've got to get your mind back in gear, get the aircraft configured, and everything happens rather quickly. So I could totally see that. But I guess I should stop waffling and look at that wonderful device you have over your right shoulder. I think it would be great to actually see the device and have you talk us through the technology behind it.
Perfect. So this is our helmet system. We have a helmet. We have our helmet system for both day and NVG operations. Of course, this is our day operations. I'll pull up the NVG visor and kind of explain the differences. And then we have a non-helmet system, which uses our same visor. And we have a halo system. Our system has its own power pack. We control everything through a Wi-Fi network from Level Aviation. They provide our AHRS for us. They've been a fantastic partner to work with. They were actually at the show with us. They came out and were in our booth with us. But what ends up happening is what we found, and again, this is a show demo, so it should go from high to low. There it goes. So now you can see my hand behind it. So this is just a show ramp. We're going to go from clear visibility to fully opaque, and then it's going to bounce back, which is a good simulation of what our safety is going to do. Here in a second, it's going to bounce all the way back to full clear. That's a good demonstration of our safety. It's not really why it does it that way. It's just for the show. But the system is easy to detach. We are in the realm of the frangibility requirements of head-mounted displays. But what we found, and then from this side, we're going to attach to our night vision goggle mount with the quick disconnect pins. We actually are working on a final version, which I hope to have out in the next week or so, that will attach the to our customer base that does not have the NVG mount. Going back though, so we attach magnetically for that breakaway capability, and we want to block the pilot's view. Another unique thing that you'll see about this is one side is I call it a teardrop. But that teardrop covers up some of that openness in our glare shield, and that I always joke that I'm fortunate in the Army. I get to fly both our Lima models, our older models, and then I fly our Mike model, which is our digital cockpit. The Mike has a much better visibility from the glare shield. The glare shield got smaller, so we want to cover that up so that we're only looking through here. And then we only want it on one side, because if I put it on both sides, what's going to end up happening is now I'm focused into this gap. And that's not how we really fly. We fly with our eyes. We use that full scanning. So by putting it on both sides, we're creating some very negative habit transfer. So that's why you'll see we're only on one side. It is reversible. It can go either left or the right side. It's user level. They remove these two, slide it out, flip it over. We can fly left seat or right seat. This power pack is very light. All the parts have the weights on them. I won't bore you with it, but all the parts are exceptionally light. And again, we control everything through an iPad app, and it's all automated. When we talk a little bit, our NVG system, you can kind of see a size difference in our visors. So you'll notice that obviously we're much smaller with the NVG. Something else that we were very adamant about, I'm going to set this nice down on my shoulder. Something else we were very adamant about with our NVG piece is we don't want to touch the night vision goggles. So this is going to slide under the NVG mount. The goggle tubes are going to end up right here. So they're looking through the system. That's the night vision goggles. The goggles are going to run anywhere from about 12 to 14 up to around 18 or 19,000. So when we look at trying to keep that night vision goggle tube from touching our system from touching the night vision goggle tubes, we want to protect those tubes. The other thing that really is a consideration in why we did that, much like our other system, the day system, it's magnetic. The other part is you'll notice that there's no power applied and it's opaque. So the consideration there is if you are attached to the tubes themselves and you lose power, you really have lost the pilot. Because their goggle tubes are covered. If we lose power for some reason, you're just going to pull this apart and set it down in the door panel. So a couple of our design characteristics in what we did, we use the exact same connection as the night vision goggles. So we have the same breakaway capability as the night vision goggles. So we want to consider that accident sequence in the breakaway. And then we want to consider that egress snag hazard. So this is going to run right back to a different battery pack. A lot of guys want to ask, does it use the night vision goggle? It absolutely does not. It just looks similar. But it runs on an ARP system, but it uses that same connection, either the dovetail and Velcro to attach to the helmet, and then what's called a LEMO connection to attach our system. So it keeps right in line with what we're accustomed to using, and again, that breakaway capability.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm just looking at the specs now, actually. And so I see here the safety sensors. So the device will go clear if preset pitch, roll, and vertical speed or altitude are exceeded, bringing training pilot back into VMC conditions. So is that's preset in the system, or is that kind of iPad? So, and if you could tell us a little bit about the iPad app there.
Sure, absolutely. So it's preset in the iPad, in the user's iPad. So we use Level creates, we use their AHRS. We have some slight changes that they make for us, but we're getting all our AHRS data from Level. And the reason that's relevant is we use it not only for our automation, but also for our safeties. Inside the app, the first thing we're going to do as the user, and when we teach how to use the app, is we're going to go in and set the safety parameters. Your organization said, hey, this is what we want. So we'll call it 20 degrees pitch and 45-degree angle of bank. So if the AHR senses the aircraft exceeds those limits, the system's going to immediately go clear. So that's that safety. It's set by each individual iPad. It can be set anywhere from basically off up to 30 and 60. The other part that we often will have folks set and we recommend is we do the same thing with vertical speed. So we can set a few other things, but those are the three: pitch, roll, and vertical speed. So if we develop a vertical speed rate of, say, 1,000 feet per minute rate of descent, we'll trigger a go clear function. So that's how our safeties are built. We're pulling all the data from our AHRS, and then we're able to answer the FAA and the NTSB's concerns of, hey, how do you do this training safely? And that's how we were able to answer their safety concerns.
Well, that's some great technology, and at vertical speed, especially in the helicopter realm, I could see that being that's a wonderful feature to have. Let me bring up the video here. I think it might be a great chance for you to talk us through. So it's a video demonstration there, and it's a shorter video, so maybe I'll play it through twice, and you can talk us through that.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully that's up and sharing now.
Absolutely. So what we're going to see is a demonstration of our day in NVG. Excuse me, we're going to start out with our static testing, and then go into actually an in-flight test as well. This is our dust, simulating a dust takeoff. So we're seeing as we come out of the clouds, we're going to go clear, and then we're going to transition into our dust landing. This is live recorded in the helicopter. We're going to see that dust develop around, again, only the flying pilot. This is all automated, so we're not going to see any. We're not going to distract our safety pilot at all. So we're going to see the dust develop. That's actually our HGU 56 system. So you see, if you look closely, you can see the brackets on it. So it hooks up slightly different to the HGU 56. One of the things we ran into with the Army specifically is we do not take our NVG mounts off. They stay on all the time. So we had to work around that versus on the civil side. But again, all this is being done automatic. It allows for the safety pilot to be focused. And we're going to see the same concept in our en route phase. Everything's automated. We're going to see the development of the low visibility flight condition. And one of the things in all our different areas of our app, when we go in and say, hey, we want to do a random scenario, which is just going to give you a distance, excuse me, a set parameter. Okay, I'm going to start my ramp down to X here, and it's going to take this amount of time. So one of the things it's going to ask is, hey, how low do you want your visibility to go? And that's true. So we have 4 scenarios for the inadvertent IMC piece. One of them is manual, random, which is the one I'm talking about now, pre-programmed, and then accidents. I'll highlight very quickly. I'll highlight a little bit why they're different. So the random scenario is kind of the bread and butter. It's easy to use. But what we ask is, hey, how low do you want visibility to go? Because if I take the visibility down to 0, I give the pilot no choice. And what we found is when I have no choice, it's not hard. I have no choice. We want to train the decision making. So we typically tell our customers somewhere between 0.5 and 1 mile visibility below your organizational minimum. So to make it simple, we're just going to say we're BMC. We want 1,003. So we'll bring it down to 2 to 2.5 miles. And we're looking for that decision making. We're working for that in-route decision trigger, or in-route decision point of, hey, why are we continuing to fly? Our organization said that we can't fly less than 3 miles, but yet here we are at 2. Then we can talk about some distance estimation. That's with our manual system. It's my least favorite. I always talk about it first, generally speaking, and it's kind of my joke of I talk about it first, but it's my least favorite. It's because I believe it's unsafe. We only want it used for 2 things. One, we want to use it to teach distance estimation and visibility estimation. We go out and we tell guys and gals, hey, don't fly in 2 miles visibility. But most young pilots never experience that. So how do you go out and tell someone not to do something if you don't demonstrate what that something is? So we're going to go out. It's going to be very crew coordination heavy. Hey, here we're going to go. This is 3 miles. Okay, are you ready? Okay, here we're going to go to 2 miles. No part of this is designed around spatial disorientation because, again, if I'm trying to put you into a scenario using this manual mode, I'm running a risk of distracting my safety pilot, and that's what I want to stay away from. The other thing that's good is I always joke in a Black Hawk, our engine power control levers are up on the front upper console in the front, and as I gave a truck ride last Thursday night, and I will promise you, when I reached my hand up, the guy flying was ready to go. Oh, it looks like I have an engine failure. I have a change in engine. He runs through that not because he's responding to the aircraft, but because he's responding to where my hands are. So if every time I fly this system goes to zero visibility, then I'm not responding to the information I'm being provided. I'm just triggered that at some point I know it's going to go into Vert IMC. So one of the things we recommend with manual is, hey, go set 3 miles, throw it in the door panel, 4 miles, doesn't matter. We can go anywhere from 0 to, we claim 7 miles. It's really unlimited, but it's slightly opaque, but we can cover anything from unlimited to 0, and hold them in just a place and let them fly there all day. Again, that way I don't train the pilot that when you wear this system, it's going to be bad. So that's our manual, is setting up visibility demonstrations and then just letting it be. Now, where we make all our money is in that random scenario as well as our program point. So our training, one of the things we provide to all our customers is a training plan. We want to provide a turnkey solution. So we start with, hey, this is what, this is 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile, just that visibility demonstration. Then we're going to go into that random scenario where we're just going to train the spatial orientation part, train the decision-making part. And there's some varying ways we do that. For example, depending on the intent of my training, when you say, hey, guys, man, I'm done. This is where I'd call it. Okay, what would you do, Matt? Oh, I would do thus and so. I would land, or I would commit to inadvertent IMC, whatever your organization does. Depending on the point of my training, I may say, hey, that's great, make a note of it, but we're going to continue. Because my training may be geared around specific to creating spatial disorientation. It may be geared around trying to talk about that decision-making process. As we go, the program point is able to take that random scenario, but I initiate it at a predetermined point. And what's great about that is for our law enforcement customers, if they're on station searching for a bad guy or a good guy, whatever their reason for flying may be today, we can put them on station. And when they get within 1 nautical mile of that point, the visibility is going to start coming down. What that allows is that scenario-based training. Because again, it's kind of like our pilot that as they get close to the airport, they're going to accept more risk. The risk that I accept right here looks different than what the risk I get in the helicopter, which looks different than the risk I'll take once I take off, which looks dramatically different than the risk I will take once I load a patient if I'm an EMS operation. Looks dramatically different. And we can all tell ourselves that I won't accept greater risk as I move further into my flight. But the reality and the statistics show we certainly do that. And I think any human, if they're honest with themselves, would say that if I pick up a patient and I know if I land, the life of that patient's at risk, that becomes a tough decision. And I don't mean that in a good way or a bad way. It's just a statement of fact. I was fortunate. My first deployment was medevac, so I was able to a little different world and how we function from the military side. But once you have that patient on board, it kind of changes that dynamic a little bit, whether it's conscious or subconscious. So that's from our scenario-based training, and that's kind of our culminating event. And then the last one, we take real world accidents and we recreate them. I always get in trouble for this comment, but pilots for the most part are type A personalities. I know that's not across the board, but we all believe we're good at what we do. So if you and I go out and train and I fail or I don't do well, Matt, then it must be because the training wasn't realistic. That's not how it really happened. We take that out and we take a real world accident that was fatal, and we can recreate that accident. Now it's not your opinion or my opinion. This is what really happened. And we remove that type A. That's not how it really happened, because I couldn't have failed. And I'm exaggerating a little bit in that, but it's not up for discussion. This is a fatal accident. We follow the path of that accident, or substantially similar. We're not getting creative in what we think happened. We're taking the facts and recreating them. So those are our 4 training modes. The 3, once you tell it, hey, I want to do the random scenario and I want to go to 2 miles, you can hit start. You set the iPad to the side. And that's why the manual works. If we're going to set 4 miles today and set the iPad to the side, the user or the safety interaction, safety pilot's interaction, is exactly the same. Hit start, set it to the side. How the training pilot, what happens to them looks dramatically different based on what the safety or instructor pilot shows.
Yeah, well, that's some great information there. And you touched on law enforcement, and we've spoken before about my time at the police department down in City of Fontana down in California. And
Mhm.
it's, especially talking about light visibility. I think it depends on a lot of factors, but for me, it was where I trained. I started my helicopter flying career in Long Beach, California. Now, I don't know if you've ever flown in Southern California, but
You guys.
you trip over, yeah, you trip over airspace, and everything's very easy. I mean, I say easy. I remember my first time transitioning LAX airspace, and I was freaking out, as a young junior pilot. But then you've got airspace everywhere, visibility. You've got these ground reference points everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And your instructor could say, "Well, how far do you see?" "Oh, I can see to there." "Okay, well, that's Compton Courthouse." So you can actually get a good estimation
Yeah.
on distance, and you get very comfortable with the area that you operate. And the same as a
Yes.
law enforcement pilot. We're usually in a geographic area that we're very comfortable with. And that can lull you into a false sense of security, especially when you're mission orientated. And I have to be careful, because the word mission on the EMS side is like a
Oh, I
dirty,
know.
dirty word. I work very closely with a lot
Yes.
of EMS companies, and having worked for one before. But on the police side of things, it was a mission. You're chasing a bad guy with a
Yeah.
searchlight or something like that, and um, you're told, you're pilot in command, you're flying, you have an observer to do this. Okay, but I have to position the aircraft correctly for my tactical fly observer to do his mission. So you're kind of in between these two zones, and now flight visibility comes in, and it's fine when you're in training, and I know,
Yeah.
I'm focused on how far out I can see, but now I'm kind of split between here, my instruments,
Yeah.
the guy on the freeway over here, and as the visibility comes down. So I can really see a great application. I can see why this would be such a great tool from that side of things. But where was I going from here? I'm sorry. As you were talking there, I wrote down a whole bunch of things here. But with the you said you provide these different levels of training, and scenario-based training is one thing that I really feel strongly about, that's underused in our industry, or it's largely misunderstood. The scenarios aren't well designed, they're not thoughtful. And I had this conversation with another safety professional last week, actually, around safety reports and using them in training. And I don't know, I'd love your opinion on this. There's a lot of hesitations with organizations in using those, especially when it's very close to home, if you know what I mean. If it's
Yes.
a competing organization, maybe it's from your own organization the incident occurred. But I tend to feel there's a lot of hesitation around that, when there's so much information in there that can be used positively in training, in modification of procedures, risk mitigation when we're going through kind of SMS and those kind of things. Using information out there effectively in reducing our risk going forward. But have you seen that much out there? The hesitancy of using actual real cases in scenario-based training?
Yeah. So I agree completely with what you're saying. The closer to home, certainly it becomes a problem. I'm not going to say where. I was teaching an accident. At the end of my classes, I always highlight a couple of accidents, and they change depending on who the audience is or the recency. This accident happened to be about 90 days old, and it really didn't have a ton of information. Just, hey, look at the weather. This kind of looks like it's going to be some SD. A gentleman came up to me after he had calmed down by the time he talked to me, but that was his friend in that accident. I actually added a disclaimer onto the front of my presentation that I am going to talk about accidents, because I do talk about a few. And then when I go in the accident review, there's another disclaimer that says, hey, all we're talking about from here on out are accidents. In the real world, I'm not judging decision making. We're just talking facts. And really, the accident sort of highlight how the brain works and what's happening. It's not the decision making or anything like that. So when we hit that near to home, it certainly It is a struggle. I think as you go out, I think human nature. I don't want to be reminded of my failures. My dad was in transportation his whole life, and he was a safety. He was a safety. We'd call him a safety officer. I'm not sure what the proper term was when he was there, but he told me, and it stuck out to me. He told me when I was a little kid. It's become much more relevant as I've gotten older. But he said, "You never know how good your safety department is, but everyone knows how bad it is." And I think it's hard for people to bring in and be reminded of their failures or their organizational failures, even if the organization's not at fault. So I think that creates a big challenge. And then I think the other one, depending on how you grew up in aviation, I think changes how you view that. From my background, we review annually at least our air crew coordination, which is our crew resource management, what we call it ACT. We review accidents, fatal accidents. We know a lot of these people in these accidents. I grew up very much in that world. So I think the other part, and actually, there's the natural tendency of a personal organization that if it's close to home, but even if it's not, depending on how you grew up in aviation, I think there's a different mindset. One thing that I think is interesting is, and I train, I think I'll pick on him. My oldest guy is 61, and I've got 20-year-olds that I'm training from the Army side. And so we have a wide spread in our generational gaps. What's super interesting to me is when I first got in aviation, when folks, matter of fact, I first, this last safety stand down we had was the first time I've heard this story told out loud in a public setting, because every other time was over a beer and kind of no crap, there I was. Not many people knew this story. So it was interesting to hear it come out in a more professional forum, let's say, in an actual organized, structured event. But they went into Vern IC, found a sucker hole, almost came to the ground. Is the short and sweet of it. But I grew up in a time where we bury those things. We're going to talk about it in the aircraft, and we're going to get out of the aircraft, and that never happened. We could never admit our mistakes. I do think one of the greatest about the younger generation that's coming up is they're much more open to sharing both good and bad. Good things and bad things is what I mean by that. So I think from a cultural standpoint, I think it's very interesting as you move into our younger generation of pilots. They are more open to saying, "Man, you won't believe what I did today." They're not as ego-driven or hard-headed. I'm not putting a word to it, but they're not driven by, let's vary what I did today and the mistake I made. They tend to be a little more open and sharing, which is exactly what the industry needs, because I cannot afford to make every mistake on my own. I'm doing my best to make a lot of them, unfortunately, but I have to learn from you. I have to learn from everyone I talk to. We just don't have the ability to make all the mistakes ourselves. So we need this culture that we share our learning and our education. Years ago, I used to read it more frequently. I candidly don't. The Navy, we put out flight facts in the Army. The Navy put out, I think it was called Approach. But it's really interesting. When the guys wrote it, all the articles I read is, here's what the rule book says. Here's what I did. Here's where I followed it and it worked. Here's where I followed it and it didn't work. Here's where I broke the rules, and here's where it worked, and here's where it didn't work. But it was a very candid, here's the regulation or the requirements or the manual for the aircraft, and here's where I followed and didn't follow, and here's why I didn't follow. And it was a very candid review of the incident that took place. And there was so much value in my mind of looking at, I probably shouldn't say this on a safety podcast, but a guy flew it a long time ago. His comment was, everything's legal in an emergency. And if you don't take it at its base, what he was trying to communicate is, and the FAA even says it, that we'll use our sound knowledge and decision-making to make the best decision possible. And if we violate a regulation, we just have to own it, right? So, and that was the right way to say what he said. His was certainly a more comical way to say it. And he had a very Southern accent to add to it, so it added a little humor. But that's what I really felt the Navy did a great job of, is looking at where they use their skill set, their decision, and their knowledge, to make what they believe to be the best decision given the information they had at hand. So that going back to your question, though, I think from an industry standpoint, I do think we're shifting away from this mentality where I don't want to talk about my mistakes or my organization's mistakes or, even my sector of the industry's mistakes. I think we're getting a little more comfortable in the kind of owning our mistakes and accepting them and learning the value of learning from them, or appreciating the value of learning from them. So I'm hoping that we're seeing a cultural shift in that very thing you're talking about, and I certainly see it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that insight into that. I just want to share two things, and then we can get back on topic because I've got a couple more questions on the device for sure. But one, on my previous role for the air ambulance company, I remember my first week on the job, and it was in-dock training, and we had a lot of pilots coming in,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, "Right, well, straight in, you're giving the presentation next week." And I'm like, "Cool, what am I presenting on?" "Oh, well, it's the first day of the safety department, and you're giving the accident presentation, the past 10 years of incidents for the company." Now, at first, it shocked me because I was like, "Well, welcome to the company. Here's everything that's gone wrong." And seeing, talking for an hour about these incidents that had occurred in the company's history, actually the value of it showing this is what happened. We thought we were prepared for everything and we didn't account for this, or this is what we planned for and it veered off in this direction, but this is how we've addressed it. This is how we've mitigated the action moving forward. And the value for that for the air crews, because now they can see, that the company is committed through their safety management system, through their risk assessment process, and a safety assurance going back to see if the fix actually worked. Actually, the value of that was huge because now the participation and involvement was absolutely immense because they see that as an organization, you're trying to do the best thing. And I completely forget about what the other point was. That's Monday mornings.
I would say I'll add one little thing to that, and I agree completely with what you're saying. I think, I forgot who it was, somebody made the comment, I would never go to work for an organization that doesn't have an incident report, because they're liars. Our business is dangerous. I forget who the quote is attributed to, but aviation is not inherently dangerous, but unforgiving. We do a great job of mitigating risks. But when we make a mistake, it is unforgiving. I think what's very interesting in that premise is the fact that when you talk SMS specifically, is that you're recording your accidents and your incidents. Accidents are hard to not record. There's typically someone like the FAA watching to make sure you record them. The near misses and the near misses, those are the ones as an organization, I want to hear those, because the truth is your culture is either such that your pilots are making mistakes and not confessing, or you as an organization are burying them. And neither of those are providing good quality safety culture for an organization. So I love this premise of talking about the accidents and owning that we do make mistakes. We are all human. We all make mistakes. So to sit and say that first day, you're right on the surface is like, holy cow, that's a lot. That's a lot to take in. But the other one is by putting it out there. I just think there's so much value in establishing a culture that it's not punitive. We want to build on safety. We want to know where the mistakes are made so that we can put into action corrective steps. And so I really think that's such a huge step forward in improving the culture of an organization, or improving the overall safety of an organization. So I think it's fantastic.
And that second point I had was what you mentioned about the changing culture, especially with the new blood coming into the industry, that are more open to share information about the goods and the bads they've experienced, which is exactly what we need for a good safety culture within the limits of a just culture too. We have to always consider that, but the fact that people are open in talking about it, as opposed to the no one saw that because I was out in the middle of the desert and no one has to know. But the fact that everyone can learn from it, and as an organization we can attack it, and it's great to see more and more organizations actually sharing that within the industry and not just keeping it within the walls of their organization.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
okay. Let's go back on track. This was a great conversation, by the way. I any chance I have to put in risk management and SMS, I'll always try and take that track. But in terms of so we've talked about the device itself. We've talked about the training that comes along with that as well. What organizations are you kind of approaching with this right now? I mean, obviously, it would work for so many applications, if not all applications. But right now, what's your main kind of focus right now in terms of organizations?
So our core markets can be our EMS and law enforcement market. The majority of our accidents are occurring under NVH or occurring at night. The FAA doesn't necessarily differentiate whether the goggles were being worn or not. The Army side, the majority of our accidents statistically are under night vision goggle operations because we have a little different reportings in that regard. So EMS and law enforcement are core industries for us. Our non-helmet system, of course, opens up from the VIP transport side. So really, the whole market. This, what was interesting as we started researching is this is not an Army problem. This is not an EMS problem. This is not a law enforcement, and it's not even a helicopter problem. And normally when I teach, I give it the thing, but it continues to. It's not an industry problem. It's a helicopter problem. But the reality is, you'll see it's an aircraft problem. It doesn't matter what you fly. With that being said, though, the market is that core law enforcement EMS. We're just in the first stages of really talking to a couple schools about implementing kind of the cradle to grave concept, that implementing this type of training, this low visibility flight conditions training into the schoolhouse rather than let's start from day one and continue that training. It is definitely a diminishing skill set. It's not something you get to do one and done. It's not something, that you should do once a year. We recommend a couple iterations per year. And generally speaking, what we encourage is quarterly. A lot of times that's not realistic for an operation, but the FAA talks about if I'm an IFR operation, I should do a semi-annually. So why would this be any different? We kill a lot more people in low visibility flight than in IMC flight, pure IMC flight. So with that, the minimum we want to see from our customers is at once every 6 months. But again, we really try to talk to them about it quarterly. And because the system's automated, and in our case, I can take any safety pilot and go out and get effective training because the system is doing the training. The safety pilot is there to monitor and keep the aircraft safe. So you can go out, and yes, there should be some evaluations, and there's a discussion, Scott Bowden's great, about kind of non-punitive training events. But, we're very punitive in aviation. It's a go, no-go event, and that has to be. But when we go out and train, because of the way our system is designed, all I need is a training pilot and a safety pilot. And the company can put parameters that you'll only use the random scenario. For example, you can create these specifics and control the left and right boundaries so that everything we're going to do is automated, and we just have that safety pilot. So going back, though, our law enforcement arguments are really our core, and we're really trying to push into the schoolhouse right now because it's such an opportunity to get the infancy, the training done at the infancy. It's a little philosophical. I believe that we can find something to train into or out of the flight training program that will help build better decision making and cause inaction or prevent inaction. Not sure what the answer looks like. We do such a good job talking about accidents, and our accident investigators do a phenomenal job. It always floors me reading accidents and just how they can look at something and go, well, because of this, this, and this, we know this. It's like, holy cow, yeah, you're right. That makes total sense when you explain it to me like a child. But amazing that they came up with these things. So we do a really good job in the accident phase. We don't do a good job in the near misses, and there's so much data in the near misses. And that's what one of the things with our system, and we talk with our customers about, is I think I use that example of my point is spatial disorientation training with you today. And you go out and say, hey, this is kind of my knockout point. This is when I would execute my in-route decision point. But I have you continue. Well, if you become spatially disoriented 20 seconds later. Was that really a good decision at that point? That's that near miss that we can talk about. And by training it early on, we train better decision making from the very, very onset. Once you learn to control the aircraft, then we want to start introducing that decision making more into that phase. So really, again, law enforcement, EMS, and VIP are our core market. And then the other one is our military operators. Of course, that's near and dear to our heart. We all of us involved in the company are all military, current or former military. So the military piece is big because in the military, and no one wants to say it, the law enforcement fall in this realm a little bit as well. I know I have a friend that flew for an agency, and their requirements, they did not fly less than 1,003, non-discussable. That was until they had to go find someone that was lost and ended up saving two people's life. So as an organization, their minimums were X. This pilot received an award for going out in well less than X. So our minimums from a governmental side, law enforcement, military, when our mission dictates that we have to go, there's a lot of different discussions there. So it's certainly trying to train the dust and snow landings for the military. So that military market is there for us as well. And from the international side, again, this is not a United States problem. This problem exists in all aspects of where we see aircraft operations taking place.
No, for sure. And I think we could talk for a whole episode on variable limits for certain organizations. But
Yes.
we'll avoid that for now. So if an organization they've seen this and they've seen this your AT system, what are they looking at in terms of the cost of implementation? How does the training figure in with that as well? Talk a little bit about that.
So the system itself for the day and NBG system contains everything you need except for the iPad. Is 4,370, 4,370s. That's going to give you obviously the system, but what it's also going to give you is it's going to give you our team. So we're obviously going to do the training for using the system, but we offer to every customer. We teach. I've taught at CHC. I've taught at Heli Expo. I've taught for several of our customers, and then I've taught for several military organizations. It's anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half block of instructions. We offer that whether it be via Teams or we'll come out. We always tell people we'll cover our personnel costs if you just cover our travel costs. So with Teams, it's not as effective. Not having that eye contact because, of course, I'm looking down at my screen to look at you, and I'm trying to look at my camera when I talk. So it's not ideal, but it absolutely is better than nothing. So you get the system, but you also get training of the academic training, which the ACTARC talked about. And we use the ACTARC as a basis for that. The other part is you're going to get a complete training program. I always joke, if you implement my training program from start to finish, you won't have time to do anything else. So the premise of our training program is kind of that smorgasbord, that buffet style, is here's all the things you can do. It's not realistic that you do them all, but we're able to pluck and pull based on the experience of the organization, based on the flight activity of the organization, the mission of the organization. We may find different ones. Some of them we only do once. So, for example, once I do distance estimation, it's really a one-time event with that manual function in our system is, hey, here's 4 miles, 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile. I don't need to demonstrate that every year. That's not good use of my aircraft hours or my personnel hours. So you get that turnkey solution. The other thing we're capable of doing is we can create a custom scenario for your organization. We have one customer that's talked with us. We haven't come to fruition because they haven't quite finished in, but they have a valley where they fly, and that valley creates low visibility flight conditions. So as they enter into that valley, we're going to create a scenario that the ceilings are going to come down and the visibility is going to come down, so that they are forced in that decision. That's a common choke point for them. So we're able to create things specific to an organization as well. So when we want to be that turnkey solution, we're all, I don't think any organization right now is immune from losing experience and just being short pilots. So we don't want to create additional work for you. And our program is around implementing into your standard work module, whatever that looks like. We're going to help you build a training program using our model, our base model, to fit your organization, that we're not putting additional, uh, taking additional resources from you or creating. So again, you get the system itself, you get the academic option, whichever way you want to go. And then the last piece is we're gonna help you build a program of what it looks like. We started this and want to make a difference. And if you buy the system and put it on the shelf, it doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody. We want to be part of that implementation. We want to be a partner. We're not here to sell a widget. We're not here to just sell it and forget about it. We want to continue staying engaged. We went out to Utah, to one of our customers in Utah, and went and taught. I actually went and taught twice, 2 weeks in a row. And then I'm waiting for them to tell me when I get to come out and get in the helicopter with them. So, which I'm excited about for that in itself. But we're going to provide that total package of a complete training program and how the customer wants it to look, anywhere from, like I said, in person to remote, whatever works best for them.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And I think the value of having that, not just ongoing support, but to build out the program, because otherwise, how many times do you see in organizations where they have the latest fancy toy and it goes for a quarter or 6 months and then it starts gathering dust. So no, I think that's great and great value for a whole product there. So I've reached all of the end of my questions. I mean, thank you so much for presenting this technology. I think it's a real game changer. I hate using that term game changer, but I just used it. I know. It seems everywhere now. But no, I mean, it really does. You know, I see that the product is really having so much value in organizations and being applicable to smaller organizations too. I think I've seen so many times as an auditor going into bigger organizations and smaller organizations and seeing this disparity, this gap in capabilities, and so many smaller organizations feel that financially they couldn't afford to implement it, or in terms of human resources too, simply don't have the bandwidth to implement a mitigation. But I see this really as fitting that niche that you know, a lot of organizations are trying to tackle. So Tyson, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been fantastic. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you to all the podcast listeners and viewers. I really appreciate you tuning in today for this episode on the wonderful technology from AT Systems. You can follow up on atsystemsllc.com, and I'll put their contact information at the bottom there as well. Our next podcast is going to be with the wonderful Randy Maines, talking about crew resource management and his journey from Vietnam through EMS and beyond, and now as a published author. It's going to be a great episode on our next one, so don't miss that one. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you, Matt. Have a great day.